Are we overweight because we're not eating enough protein in general? I mean, not on an individual level. So is a lower protein diet contributing to the obesity epidemic? Some of you will immediately say, no, it's calories that are causing the obesity epidemic, or more an imbalance between our calories. So we're moving less and we're eating more. Not great. And yes, of course, you are absolutely right. That is the fundamental. But why are we driven to eat more? And one theory is termed the protein leverage hypothesis. And the core idea here is that your body is driven to eat a certain amount of protein. Now, most of our sort of fast foods or processed foods are quite low in protein. That means that to reach this protein threshold that your body wants, you inevitably eat more calories. That means that to reach this protein threshold that your body wants, you inevitably eat more calories. Now, it's probably not as much protein as most of you would think. So I'm talking to an audience that is already highly invested in their nutrition. It's probably about a 15% of intake level of protein. But if you acknowledge that highly processed foods have a lower protein content, you would be driven to eat more of them regardless of the fact that you've already eaten enough calories. The idea that this theory plays at least a part in the obesity epidemic is actually quite supported by animal studies and also, interestingly, bariatric surgery, which I'm about to discuss, of the small intestine, meaning that less food is digested, and this is used to treat obesity of the small intestine, meaning that less food is digested, and this is used to treat obesity. So during this surgery, your stomach is kind of stapled to make it smaller, but your digestive system is also replugged or replumbed, if you will, so that food enters the small intestine at a later part. Now, another side effect of this replumbing is that more undigested food appears later in the digestive tract, and this is important. Now, another side effect of this replumbing is that more undigested food appears later in the digestive tract. And this is important because usually at this stage of digestion, I've said usually too many times, because at this later stage of digestion, usually only protein is still around because it takes longer to break down and digest. So this signals to your brain that you're having more protein. And thus, if we believe the protein leverage hypothesis, that is a hard word to say, then your brain would turn off its hunger signals because it thinks it's had enough protein. And thus, if we believe the protein leverage hypothesis, that is a hard word to say, then your brain would turn off its hunger signals because it thinks it's had enough protein. Now, I realise that none of this seems like hard evidence, but there's actually some very interesting studies showing the difference in hormones released from the gut that are related to feeding behaviours. And that does seem to coincide with this more food in the later part of the digestive tract reducing hunger signals. So maybe it's signalling that there's more protein there and thus we don't need to eat anymore. Threshold, you're way overeating in terms of. Anyway, quite an interesting different take on why we overeat. And I find it quite interesting because there are a lot of signals that would or should control our eating in relation to our energy intake, but they don't. And this could be a reason why they don't, because you're still trying to reach that protein threshold with foods that are much more highly caloric, meaning that to still reach that